anymore. 6 months later. Blackwater Park, Hampshire, 15th June 1850. 6 lonely months have passed, and I am with dear Laura once more, but we now live at Blackwater Park, Sir Percival's house in Hampshire. It is a big old house, surrounded by trees. I find it dark and depressing. I arrived here a few days ago. Sir Percival, Laura, Count Fosco, and Madame Fosco arrived yesterday. Laura has changed in the last 6 months. I noticed it in her letters, and now I see it in her face. That honest, open look has gone. There are things now that she will not discuss with me, her husband, her married life. But before we kept no secrets from each other. Sir Percival has changed too. At Limmeridge, he was always friendly. But when he saw me yesterday, he was cold. His manner towards Laura has changed. He does not look at her with tender interest anymore. Madame Fosco is different from the Eleanor Fairley I once knew. Eleanor Fairley was an irritating woman who talked too much and wore expensive clothes. Now she dresses very simply and sits silently, rolling cigarettes for her husband. And her husband? What can I say of Count Fosco? He has certainly tamed his wife, and he looks like a man who could tame a tiger. He interests and attracts me. He forces me to like him. He is enormously fat, and his face looks like Napoleon's. He has intelligent gray eyes. When I look into them, I feel things that I do not want to feel. He speaks English fluently with no accent. He tells me that he left Italy a long time ago, for political reasons. The Count has been Sir Percival's friend for years. They first met in Rome. Percival was attacked by thieves, and Count Fosco saved his life. The Count's influence over Percival is much stronger than Laura's. I have never before met a man like Count Fosco. I am very glad he is not my enemy. But is this because I like him, or because I am afraid of him? 16th of June. This morning, Sir Percival's lawyer came to see him. As I was walking to my room, I heard them talking. "Don't worry," said the lawyer. "If your wife signs the document, everything will be all right. If not—" "Of course she'll sign the document," said Sir Percival angrily. I went to Laura's room and told her what I had heard. "I know that Percival has debts," she said, "but I won't sign anything without reading it first." After lunch, Sir Percival said, "Will you sign this, Laura? It's just a formality. Miss Halcombe and Count Fosco, will you be our witnesses?" He folded the document and placed it on the desk with his hand resting on the folded part. The only part of the document that was visible was the line for her signature and the lines for the signatures of the 2 witnesses. "Sign your name here," he said. "What is the document about?" asked Laura. "I've no time to explain," said Sir Percival. "A carriage is waiting for me outside. I have to go away on urgent business. Come on, sign it." "I can't sign it unless I've read it. Mr. Gilmore always asked me to read documents before I signed them." "Gilmore was your servant. I'm your husband. Don't you trust me?" cried Sir Percival angrily. "It's not fair to say I don't trust you," said Laura. "Ask Marian if she thinks I should read the document first." "It's none of Miss Halcombe's business," said Sir Percival. "Excuse me," I said, "but, as a witness to the signature, it is my business. Laura's objection seems to be fair to me." I can't be a witness unless Laura understands what she's signing." "What disrespect!" cried Sir Percival. "You're just a guest in this house." I wanted to hit him, but I was only a woman, and I loved his wife so dearly. "Percival," said the Count, "remember you are in the company of ladies." They looked at each other, and Sir Percival was the first to look away. Those cool gray eyes had tamed him. "I don't want to offend anybody," he said. "Just sign the document, will you?" "I'll happily sign when I know what's in it," said Laura. "I'll make any sacrifice, so long as it's honest. I simply think it's wrong to sign a document I haven't read." "Who said anything about sacrifice?" cried Sir Percival, furious again. "And it's strange to hear you talk of right and wrong. A woman who had a passion for her drawing teacher." Laura looked at him coldly, then turned her back on him. When I left my chair to go to her, I heard the Count whisper to Sir Percival, "You idiot." Laura walked towards the door, and I followed her. "One moment," said the Count. Laura continued walking, but I whispered to her, "Stop! Don't make an enemy of the Count." We stopped and waited. "Percival," said the Count, "can it be signed tomorrow?" "Yes, I suppose it can." "Then let's wait until tomorrow." "All right," said Sir Percival. He left the room, went straight to his carriage, and drove away. Chapter 4. A Note by the Lake, 5. Marian Halcomb's narrative continued. Later on that afternoon, I went for a walk with Laura. "I can tell you everything now, Marian," she said. "After what Percival said to me this morning, I don't feel any obligation to him. At first, just after we were married, I tried not to think of Walter. I tried to be a good wife, but Percival was so cruel. One day in Rome, a lady called Mrs. Markland came to visit us. She started talking about drawing. I tried to change the subject, but she went on. She said that her favorite drawing teacher was Mr. Hartright. I looked away from her and saw my husband looking at me closely. I suppose my face gave away my secret. Later, when we were alone, he told me he had only married me for my money. After that, I thought about Walter often, especially on the nights when Percival left me alone and went to parties with the people from the opera house. I remembered my conversation with Walter that day in the garden with horror. I had placed myself between those two young lovers. It was all my fault. Now Walter is thousands of miles away in a foreign country. His heart is broken, and so is Laura's. I did this, and I did it for Sir Percival Glyde. 18th of June. Sir Percival returned yesterday just before lunch. The Count took him for a walk in the garden. Later, the Count came to me and said, "Miss Halcombe, Sir Percival has changed his mind. He won't ask Lady Glyde to sign anything today." I told Laura the good news, then she went for a walk alone by the lake, and I went to my room. An hour later, she came to my room looking agitated. "Marian," she said, "I just met Anne Catherick by the lake. She looked ill and talked to me strangely. Marian, she looks like a paler, thinner version of myself. She says that she's dying. She spoke of how kind Mother had been to her and said that she wanted to die and be buried beside Mother. Then she spoke of Percival, how she hates him. She said that her mother had told her a secret, Percival's secret, and when he discovered that Anne knew it, He put her in the asylum. Then she suddenly stopped speaking and listened. Did you hear anything? She asked me. I'd heard nothing. Then she said, Someone is nearby. It's not safe to talk. Meet me here again tomorrow at the same time. And she ran away. After lunch today, Laura went down to the lake alone again. She waited in the same place. After some time, she noticed that someone had written the word "look" on the ground with a stick. She dug in the earth under the word and found a piece of paper. On it, Anne Catherick had written this: I was seen with you yesterday by a fat old man. When I ran away, he followed me, but I ran faster than he could. I am afraid to come back this afternoon, so I am leaving you this note at 6 in the morning. When we speak of your husband's secret, we must be in a safe place where no one can hear us. A.C. As Laura was reading Anne's note, she heard footsteps behind her. There was Sir Percival looking furious. What did Anne Catherick tell you? He cried. It's no use lying to me. I know you spoke to her yesterday. Laura told him everything, but he did not believe her. He was certain that she knew the secret. He held her arm so tightly that he left dark bruises on her white skin. She showed them to me later, and that made me want to kill him. He took her back to the house and shut her in her room. You'll stay there until you tell the truth, he cried. When I went to see her, I found the room was locked. Laura told me what had happened through the door. I went to the drawing room. There, Sir Percival, the Count, and Madame Fosco were speaking quietly. I walked up to Percival and said, You can't keep your wife as a prisoner in her own house. There are laws in England to protect women from cruelty and injustice. I'll lock you up too if you threaten me, he replied. I felt the Count's cool gray eyes on my face. Then he turned from me and nodded to his wife. She came to my side and said, Sir Percival, I must leave. I can't stay in a house where women are treated like this. Sir Percival looked shocked. The Count took his wife's arm and said, She is simply wonderful. I'm at your service, Eleanor, and at Miss Halcombe's service, too. Damn it! What do you mean? Cried Sir Percival. I mean, I agree with my wife. All right, do what you want, said Sir Percival, and he left the room. We've won, said the Count. Lady Glyde will be released from her room. Then, turning to me, he added, Let me express my sincere admiration for your courage. I went to Laura's room and found the door unlocked. Laura, dear, I said, the Count persuaded Percival to unlock your door. Don't speak of the Count, cried Laura. The Count is a spy. Just then there was a knock at the door. I opened it and found Madame Fosco there, holding my handkerchief. You dropped this downstairs, she said. Her face was pale, her hand was trembling, and her eyes looked at Laura with hatred. I realized that she was listening at the door a moment ago. When she was gone, I said, Oh, Laura, you shouldn't have called the Count a spy. When I left Laura's room and went downstairs, I saw Madame Fosco alone in the drawing room. She had never liked Laura. Laura's father, her brother, had been angry with her for marrying an Italian. She had no money of her own and had to rely on her brother's generosity, but he wasn't generous. And then, instead of leaving £10,000 to his sister directly, he left the money to Laura. Madame Fosco would only inherit the money if Laura died before she did. However, since Madame Fosco was 43 and Laura was 21, that was unlikely. Because of this, Madame Fosco had always disliked Laura. Now she had a new reason to dislike her. "Countess," I began, "I'm afraid that when you so kindly brought my handkerchief to me, you probably heard Laura say something very offensive. I hope you didn't tell the Count." "There are no secrets between my husband and me," she said. He saw that I was upset, and I told him why. "I hope that you and the Count will understand that Laura wasn't herself when she spoke those words. I hope you can both forgive her." "Certainly," said the Count's voice behind me. "I've already forgiven Lady Glyde." "You're very kind," I replied. "Let's forget about it," he said. Then he took my hand and put it to his lips. I tried to hide my disgust behind a false smile. Chapter 5. A Death. 6. Marian Halcombe's narrative continued. 20th of June. Laura and I have no father or brother to protect us. Our dearest friend Walter is in Central America, where no letter can reach him. Mr. Gilmore is ill and is staying with relatives in Germany. Our Uncle Frederick Fairley is a lazy hypochondriac, but he is also our only hope. This afternoon, I wrote him a letter, asking if we could return to Limeridge House. After dinner, Percival said to the Count, "I want to talk to you in private." The Count replied, "Later when the ladies are asleep." I said that I had a headache and went up to my room earlier than usual. I thought to myself, I must hear their conversation. I took off my dress and put on a simple cloak. I climbed out of the window and moved along a narrow ledge to the library roof where I sat down. There I could hear the voices of Sir Percival and the Count through the open windows. "Percival, we are now at a financial crisis," said the Count. "I owe hundreds of pounds. You owe thousands. We must find the money to pay those debts. Recently you've acted very foolishly. Can't you see that Miss Halcombe has more intelligence than most men? She is a noble creature, full of strength and courage, and she'll use it all to protect that foolish little wife of yours. Now explain to me about your wife's money." Sir Percival said, "It's very simple. While my wife lives, I get £3,000 a year, but that's not enough to pay my debts." "And if she dies?" asked the Count. "If she dies without children, I'll get £20,000. "Ah," said the Count, "the rain has come at last." He was right. Up on the roof, I was getting wet, but I had to hear their conversation to the end. "Do you love your wife, Percival?" asked the Count. "What a question." "If she dies, you get £20,000. "Yes, and your wife gets £10,000, cried Sir Percival. "Don't forget that. Anyway, the money isn't my only problem. I have a secret." "Don't tell me the secret. Just tell me who knows it." "My wife knows it, and a drawing teacher called Walter Hartright knows it. I know that Hartright's left the country. He's in love with my wife, and she loves him too. Anyway, the important thing is that they know the secret. Anne Catherick knows it, and she hates me. I'm sure she told them. I've tried to find her, but I can't." "What does she look like?" asked the Count. "I saw a woman by the lake. but I only saw her from behind. She looks like my wife. She's not as pretty and she's very ill, but still she looks very similar." "Really?" said the Count in surprise. He then smiled to himself and laughed. "Don't worry, Percival. You'll pay your debts, and you'll find Anne Catherick, I promise. Good night." Up on the roof, I was cold and wet. I moved slowly along the ledge to my bedroom window and climbed back in. I changed into dry clothes, lit a candle, and wrote down the conversation. "But now I am ill. I have a fever. I cannot get ill now, when Laura needs me more than ever." Note: here the diary becomes impossible to read. On the next page, another entry appears, but it is in a man's handwriting. Postscript by a sincere friend. The illness of the excellent Miss Halcombe has given me the opportunity to read this interesting diary. There are hundreds of pages here, and I have read them all with pleasure. I admire Marian greatly, her intellect, graceful style, and courage. The description of my own character is brilliant. I'm sorry that our interests are opposed. And even though they are opposed, and even though I will be victorious, I want Miss Halcombe to know how much I admire her diary, and that nothing in it contributed to my victory and her failure. Fosco, 7. Eliza Michelson's narrative, I am the housekeeper at Blackwater Park, and I took care of Miss Halcombe when she was ill. During that time, Lady Glyde was so worried about her sister that she herself became ill and stayed in her room. One day, Sir Percival called me into his study and said, "I plan to leave Blackwater Park. As soon as Miss Halcombe and my wife are well enough, they'll go to stay with their uncle in Cumberland. Count Fosco and the Countess will soon go to their new house in London, and I'll go to Paris. Send away all the servants tomorrow. You'll stay to manage the house while I'm away." The Count spent his days by the lake. I have no idea why. The next day, when the Count returned from the lake, I heard Sir Percival ask him, "Did you find her?" The Count did not reply, but he smiled. The next day was my day off. When I returned, Sir Percival told me that Count Fosco and the Countess had left for London. I then went to Lady Glyde's room to see how she was. She was still weak and depressed, and she asked me to take her to her sister's room. As we walked along the corridor, Sir Percival came up the stairs and said, "She's not there. She went to London with Count Fosco and the Countess. Then she'll go to your uncle in Cumberland." "That's impossible," cried Lady Glyde. "She didn't tell me she was going or say goodbye. I must go to her immediately." "You must wait till tomorrow," said Sir Percival. "I'll write to Fosco. He'll meet you at the station and take you to his house." Lady Glyde began to shake. "I don't want to sleep in London," she said. "You must. The journey from here to Cumberland is too long to do in one day." Lady Glyde was ready to leave the next morning. I took her to the station. When we got there, she suddenly seemed frightened. "I don't want to go alone," she said. "You've been very kind to my sister and me. Thank you." She looked so lonely as she said those words that my eyes filled with tears. "Goodbye, my lady," I called as the train moved off. When I returned to Blackwater Park, Sir Percival said to me, "Go and see if Miss Halcombe is all right. She's in the guest room on the second floor." "Miss Halcombe?" I cried. "Yes," said Sir Percival. "I had to lie to Lady Glyde. You heard the doctor say that she needed fresh air. The only way to make her go to Cumberland was to tell her that her sister had already gone. It was done with the best of intentions." "Sir Percival," I said firmly, "I can't work here any more. I'll stay until Miss Halcombe is well enough to leave, but then I must go." That night, Sir Percival left Blackwater Park. I never saw him again, and I hope I never will. 8. The Cook's Narrative. I am the cook at Count Fosco's house in London. When the Count and Countess arrived from the countryside, they brought a guest with them, the Countess's niece, Lady Glyde. She was a pretty blonde lady with blue eyes, but she looked very weak. The day she arrived, she became very ill. Dr. Goodrick examined her and said, "This is a serious case of heart disease. Lady Glyde won't live much longer." The next day she died. Dr. Goodrick registered the death, and my mistress made all the arrangements for the funeral. The dead lady's husband was out of the country, so my mistress arranged for the lady to be buried in her hometown in Cumberland, in the same grave as her mother. In conclusion, I'll answer 2 questions that Mr. Hartright asked me. 1. I never saw Count Fosco give Lady Glyde any medicine. 2. He was never alone in the room with her. 9. The doctor's narrative. I certify that Lady Glyde, aged 21, died on 25 July 1850 at 5 Forest Road, London. The cause of death was heart disease. Signed, Dr. Alfred Goodrick, 10. The gravestone's narrative. Here lies Laura, Lady Glyde, wife of Sir Percival Glyde, born 27th of March 1829, married 22, December 1849, died 25 July 1850.